They built $1 million neighborhood on land that had been in his family for over a century. But when Elijah showed up with a handwritten clause from 1923, the entire development and every home in it legally became his. Elijah Jackson didn't need an alarm clock. For 30 years, he'd woken up naturally just before sunrise, poured his coffee, and walked out to the back porch of his father's old farmhouse near Opelika, Alabama. From that quiet wooden deck, he could see straight across the southern field, the same field where his great-grandfather Otis planted sweet potatoes in the 1930s, and where Elijah's own children had once played in the tall grass. But that morning, something was different. The ground didn't feel the same. It shook. Elijah squinted into the distance. Through the trees, beyond the fence line, clouds of red dirt were rising into the sky. Machinery. Heavy. Loud. Out of place. He set his coffee down and walked toward the noise. As he crossed the ridge, the sight stopped him in his tracks. Bulldozers. 3 of them. And behind them, teams of construction workers in hard hats and neon vests planting flags in the soil like it was free real estate. But it wasn't. He walked faster, the Georgia clay kicking up behind his boots. "Hey!" he called out. A woman in a pale gray blazer turned his way. Sunglasses. Clipboard. She didn't look like she belonged in a field. She looked like she'd never gotten her boots dirty in her life. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, with a tone like she already knew the answer. Elijah looked around. "What exactly are y'all doing on my property?" Her eyebrow barely moved. This parcel was cleared for residential development under West Haven HOA's expansion permit. "You must be mistaken." "Mistaken?" Elijah's voice raised just a notch. "My name is Elijah Jackson. That field you're tearing up has been in my family since 1923. It's not for sale. Never has been." The woman held her clipboard up like a shield. "According to county records, this section was listed as unclaimed due to boundary discrepancies during the last zoning update. You're welcome to speak with our legal team, but construction is already in motion." Elijah's heart was thumping hard now, but not from fear. "Ma'am, that land is not unclaimed. I've walked it every morning since I was 27 years old. My father was born right over that rise. You're building on ground that holds more history than you could wrap your permits around." She gave a polite, empty smile. "Then I suggest you take it up with zoning and planning. We're moving forward." The machines revved louder behind her. Foundations were being dug. Trees that once shaded Elijah's childhood baseball games were now being stripped away, root by root. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just turned around and walked back toward his house, slower now. Inside, he went straight for the cabinet above the fireplace. Old papers, maps, deeds, dusty and yellowed. He remembered his father once saying, "Otis didn't trust nobody with this land, not even the government." At the time, Elijah thought it was just paranoia. But as the ground outside was being torn apart, that paranoia felt more like protection. He unfolded the brittle deed and saw it. Otis Jackson's name, handwritten in faded ink. 88 acres, purchased for $480 in 1923. No loans, no banks, just sweat, grit, and the stubborn pride of a man who refused to leave anything behind for others to take. Elijah sat down, papers spread in front of him, a creeping feeling stirring in his gut. Something was wrong. This wasn't just a paperwork mix-up. He picked up the phone and called the Lee County Zoning Office. "Yeah, I'm calling about a construction crew that's tearing up part of my land. Elijah Jackson. Been in the family over 100 years." The woman on the other end responded with rehearsed coldness. "Sir, if your land was affected by the zoning realignment, you should have received a notice by mail." "I didn't get any damn notice." "Sometimes notices get lost." That was it. Lost. Just like that, decades of family ownership could be swept away by a misplaced envelope. But Elijah wasn't just angry. He was remembering something his father once told him. It had been years since Elijah touched the old trunk at the back of the hallway closet. He dragged it out slowly, coughing as the dust filled the narrow corridor. His knees cracked as he knelt, unlatching the brass lock. The lid let out a tired creak. Inside, among black and white photos, funeral programs, and Otis's tarnished railroad watch, was a bundle of paper wrapped in oilcloth, exactly where his father said it'd be. Elijah sat cross-legged on the floor, unrolling the cloth and pulling out a heavy, leather-bound envelope. The original deed, the one Otis had stored himself. At first glance, it looked like every other piece of legal paper: printed text, handwritten margins, a wax stamp half faded. But tucked halfway down the second page, in Otis's barely legible cursive, was something unusual. A paragraph no longer written in the county's standard legalese, but in Otis's own hand, carefully squeezed into the margins. Should any structures be erected upon this land without the full consent of the deed holder or their direct blood heir, said structures shall become, in full, the property of said holder, no compensation required. Witnessed and signed on this day, February 2nd, 1923. Elijah blinked. Reread. Read again. His hands trembled. He didn't know the law, not the way lawyers did, but he'd grown up hearing the story behind that clause. How Otis had trusted no man in a suit and tie, especially not landmen. After nearly being tricked into selling off half the property in 1931 for pennies, Otis had paid a notary out of his own pocket to help him craft what he called a fence no one could climb. That fence wasn't made of wood or wire. It was made of words. Elijah picked up the phone again. This time, he called Mr. Boone, the local attorney his family had trusted for 3 generations. "I need to show you something," Elijah said. "It's about the land, about Otis." 3 hours later, Elijah was sitting in the worn leather armchair across from Boone's desk. The lawyer squinted through bifocals, flipping slowly through the document. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, tapping a knuckle against the clause. "You don't see this kind of thing anymore, but it's clever. If this was notarized and filed with the original deed, it's enforceable." "It is notarized," Elijah said. "Otis made damn sure of that." Boone nodded. "It's old, yeah, but if it's on the record, it's still the law. It might be buried in archives somewhere, but that doesn't make it go away. So what do I do?" "First," Boone said, pulling a legal pad toward him, "you don't say a word to those developers. Let 'em build. Every house they finish becomes yours. Not because of who you are, but because of who Otis was. That man didn't just leave you dirt. He left you a trap. A brilliant one." Elijah leaned back, the weight of it hitting him hard. He'd been ready to go to war, march into courtrooms and fight through red tape just to prove what was already his. But Otis had already done the fighting. All Elijah had to do now was wait. Still, he wasn't naive. He called 2 more lawyers, just to be sure. One from Montgomery, one from Birmingham. He sent them scanned copies of the deed, the clause, the notarization. Both called him back within a week. "Mr. Jackson," one said, "this is the most airtight private property clause I've ever seen. It's like your great-grandfather built a legal landmine." "I've never seen anything like it," the other told him. "As long as you document the builds, everything they construct becomes yours. Every nail, every foundation." So that's what Elijah did. He bought a drone, hired a professional surveyor, set up motion sensor cameras on the edge of the southern field. He catalogued everything: timestamps, footage, ground measurements, copies of sale signs, and open house flyers. Day by day, he watched West Haven HOA do the one thing they never should have done: assume. They built like they owned it. They sold like it was theirs to sell, but Elijah knew better. And Otis? Otis had been waiting for this day for 100 years. But if the clause was real, Elijah knew he had only one thing left to do: wait. Every morning, just after sunrise, Elijah stood on the grassy ridge where the old barbed wire fence used to run. He'd lean against the wooden post he and his father had driven into the ground decades ago, arms crossed, camera around his neck, and watch. Below, the land was transforming. Where sweet potatoes once grew and his cousin had broken his leg trying to ride a makeshift dirt bike, now stood rows of modern homes, vinyl siding in muted colors, fenced-in backyards, driveways so smooth they didn't feel like they belonged in the country. It was like watching someone else rearrange your childhood memories with no permission. They paved roads with names like Sycamore Lane and Sunset Walk, pretty names with no history. Installed light poles, poured sidewalks, even added a cul-de-sac that cut right through the grove where Elijah's mother had planted muscadines. The HOA moved fast. Too fast. Within a month, foundations were set for 20 homes. Real estate agents started showing up on weekends, holding open houses and offering guided tours to couples and retirees. Big signs near the front entrance announced, "Now selling," starting at $385,000. Elijah said nothing. He just watched. He documented everything. Daily drone footage, close-up photos of property markers, videos of workers pouring concrete, installing electrical lines, setting frames. He kept it all in a folder on his laptop called Otis's Revenge. Occasionally he'd catch the eye of a project manager or a site supervisor. Sometimes they waved. One time a man with a clipboard shouted, "Mornin'!" with fake cheerfulness. Elijah didn't respond. He wasn't here to chat. He was here to witness. Then came Jessica. Jessica Brenner. She was the same woman from day one, the one with the clipboard and blazer. She didn't recognize Elijah the first time she saw him again, standing at the ridge. But by week 3, she had started to acknowledge his presence. Once she smiled and shouted, "Still watching us, Mr. Jackson?" Elijah only raised his camera and took her picture. She didn't smile again after that. More homes popped up, fast as weeds. The speed was alarming. One day there'd be a patch of dirt. 3 days later, a full frame and roof. By the end of the second month, 32 homes were framed. 16 were already finished, with sod laid and front porches polished for weekend showings. But Elijah didn't flinch. Instead, he went to the county clerk's office and pulled the most recent sales records. He watched as West Haven's name appeared next to buyers, most of them from out of town. Ohio, Florida, even some from as far as California. He took notes. He marked down every closing date. He mapped each home's location to confirm it was inside the 88-acre zone. They were all within Otis's boundary. All of them. He even overheard Jessica one morning, talking on the phone while walking the site. "Yeah, Phase 1's flying off the market. We're starting Phase 2 next month. No issues on our end. The local guy watching from the ridge? Just some nosy landowner trying to stir up drama. We're clear." Elijah clenched his teeth but stayed silent. She had no idea. He had 3 legal opinions backing him. He had time-stamped proof of construction on disputed land. He had Otis's clause. And most importantly, he had time. Letting them build wasn't just strategy. It was justice. Every home they completed, every square foot they sold, became part of the debt they didn't know they were stacking up. Elijah had already run the numbers. If they built all 156 homes as planned, plus the community clubhouse and parkland, they'd be handing over nearly $70 million worth of real estate. To him. Jessica thought she was building a neighborhood, but Elijah knew better. She was building his portfolio. But as the sold signs piled up, Elijah began to wonder, how long could he wait while real families moved in? The first time Elijah saw children riding bikes down the brand-new sidewalks, he felt something twist in his chest. Not anger, not regret. Something heavier. The kids had no idea, of course. They were just riding in circles, chasing each other, laughing like kids should. Their parents stood nearby, sipping coffee on porches that sat squarely atop Jackson family soil. Land Elijah's great-grandfather had cleared by hand. A few houses down, a young couple was unpacking boxes. The man waved. Elijah lifted his hand slightly, unsure why. He didn't know them. They didn't know him. But their new driveway had once been his grandmother's garden. He walked home slower that day, not because his knees hurt, but because the anger that had driven him was starting to shift into something else. That evening, he sat alone in his den, the deed laid out in front of him like always. The clause was still there, still real, still his. But now, there were faces attached to the homes. People, not suits, not developers, just families trying to start something new, on land they didn't even know wasn't for sale. He picked up the phone and called Boone. "I need to ask you something," Elijah said. "I'm listening. If I wait until all the homes are done, the value goes way up. But if I act now, I might save these people from a mess. They just moved in, Boone. I saw a girl today with training wheels." There was a long pause on the line. Boone's voice came quieter than usual. "That's a moral crossroads, Elijah. What you're asking ain't legal. It's personal. Legally, you're in the right. Otis made sure of it. But what kind of justice are you after?" "I don't want to hurt these people," Elijah said. "But I do want West Haven to pay. They didn't just trespass. They erased my family's history like it didn't matter. Then maybe the real question is, can you hit them where it hurts without crushing the folks who bought those homes in good faith?" Elijah rubbed his eyes. "Can I?" Boone hesitated again. "You can. But it'll take patience. And precision. You don't rush this. You wait until they're fully invested. Let them tie the rope themselves. Then, when you speak loud enough that the next developer hears it before they ever pick up a shovel." Elijah leaned back in his chair. The ceiling fan spun lazily above him. "I saw a man planting a tree today," he said softly. "He looked proud, like he thought this was going to be his forever home." "Well, maybe it still can be," Boone said. "That depends on you." That night, Elijah didn't sleep much. He walked the edge of the property again, flashlight in hand, watching lights flicker from windows across the southern field. Inside those homes were families settling in, hanging pictures, making dinner, putting kids to bed. He couldn't be the reason they lost all that. But he also couldn't forgive the arrogance of West Haven. The way Jessica Brenner had waved him off, the way their attorneys never returned his calls, the way they'd stomped across generations like they were building on empty land. Elijah stood still for a long time at the tree line. The wind whispered through the long grass. He thought about Otis, about the nights that man had slept on the porch with a shotgun across his lap, just in case someone got too bold. Otis didn't believe in waiting. But Elijah believed in timing, so he made a decision. He would wait until the last brick was laid, not to punish the families, but to make sure the people who disrespected his family paid the full price. And then he'd make sure no one ever forgot the name Otis Jackson. But Elijah knew patience wouldn't make the next step easier. It would just make it count more. The announcement came in the mail, tucked inside a glossy invitation with gold trim. "You are cordially invited to the grand opening of West Haven Estates, Phase 2 celebration and ribbon-cutting ceremony. Join us for food, live music, and a look at the future of luxury living in eastern Alabama." Elijah stared at the card for a full minute before placing it on the kitchen counter next to the deed. The date was set for a Saturday morning in April. By then, 138 homes were fully built. Another 18 were finishing final inspections. The community center had just opened its doors, complete with a pool, tennis courts, and a marble floor lobby that looked like it belonged in a country club. They were calling it the crown jewel of the county, and every inch of it stood on Jackson land. Elijah ironed his only suit the night before. It was the one he wore to church, weddings, and funerals. He took extra care with the cuffs. Otis would have insisted. He packed a leather folder with everything: original deed, the notarized clause, the surveyor's report, photo evidence, legal opinions. He laid it in the passenger seat like it was a newborn child. The morning sun broke through as he pulled into the newly paved entrance of West Haven Estates. Banners flapped in the breeze. A white tent stood on the clubhouse lawn, where guests sipped champagne and nibbled tiny sandwiches off silver trays. He parked near the back of the lot, out of sight. No one recognized him. Not yet. From the edge of the crowd, Elijah watched as Jessica Brenner, in a bright yellow dress and oversized sunglasses, stepped up to the podium. Microphones adjusted. Flashbulbs popped. "Welcome," she beamed. Today marks not only the completion of our second phase, but the birth of a vibrant new chapter for our community." Applause echoed. The mayor stood beside her. So did a few county officials Elijah had called months ago, who never returned a single message. Jessica continued, her voice rising with every line. "Thanks to our incredible team and the support of our local government, West Haven is now home to 156 families, and growing." More applause. The string quartet picked up softly in the background. Elijah stepped forward slowly, his shoes crunching on gravel. Jessica glanced in his direction but didn't flinch. Not yet. He raised his voice, just enough to be heard over the music. "Before you cut that ribbon," he said calmly, "I believe there's something the homeowners and officials here should know." The crowd quieted. Heads turned. Jessica blinked. "Mr. Jackson," she said, her voice tight. "This is a private event." "I know exactly what it is," Elijah said. "That's why I'm here." The mayor looked uncertain. "So, what seems to be the issue?" Elijah lifted the leather folder. "My name is Elijah Jackson. My family has owned this land for over 100 years, and what West Haven built, every single house, road, tennis court, and mailbox, sits on property that was never legally theirs." Confused murmurs swept through the crowd. Jessica stepped away from the podium. "We went through all legal channels. There was a zoning discrepancy years ago." "That you never corrected," Elijah interrupted, opening the folder. "And more importantly, this deed, filed in 1923, contains a clause, written by my great-grandfather. It states that any structure built without consent becomes the property of the deed holder." He held it out. A nearby reporter stepped in, aiming a camera at the page. Jessica's face was frozen. "You're bluffing," she muttered. "That clause can't hold weight after all this time." Elijah didn't flinch. "I've had it reviewed by 3 attorneys. All of them said the same thing. It's legally binding. This land is mine, and so is everything built on top of it." A man in a grey suit whispered something in Jessica's ear. Her color drained. The mayor coughed. We may need to pause the ceremony." Jessica turned back to Elijah, her voice now sharp. "You waited. You watched us build, and you said nothing." "I told you the first day you showed up that it was my land," he said, steady. "You smiled, called security, and told me to speak to your legal team. So I did." Behind him, someone gasped. A homeowner, maybe. Maybe more. Reporters were now crowding in. Flashbulbs, pens scribbling. Jessica looked like she'd swallowed glass. "You'll never get away with this," she whispered. "I don't have to get away with anything." Elijah replied. "You handed it to me." He closed the folder gently and stepped back. The ceremony didn't resume. No ribbon was cut. But Elijah knew this was only the beginning, because the real damage hadn't even started. The next morning, Elijah's phone rang before sunrise. Unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. By the afternoon, he had 12 missed calls, 4 voicemails, and 2 emails marked urgent from West Haven's legal team. By evening, the local news had aired a segment titled, "Man Claims Ownership of Entire HOA Community." "Is it legal?" The anchor looked baffled. Elijah wasn't. He sat at his kitchen table with Boone, reviewing the deed for what felt like the 100th time. The words hadn't changed. The ink was still faded, but clear. Boone leaned back. "They're panicking. They built $1 million mess on land they didn't own. You hold every card." That night, West Haven's president called personally. Elijah didn't recognize the voice. He'd never spoken to the man before, but he could hear the tension. "Mr. Jackson, I think it's time we discuss a resolution. I'm listening. We'd like to settle this quickly and quietly. The media attention isn't helping anyone. We're prepared to offer you a fair compensation for the land value, plus a goodwill premium." Elijah didn't laugh, but it took effort. "You mean you want to pay me the price of what the land was worth before you built a luxury neighborhood on it?" "It's a generous offer. It's an insult." Elijah said, "You didn't just move dirt. You sold what wasn't yours. And now you want to buy it cheap after you flipped it for millions? Silence, and Elijah could hear the breath on the other end. Controlled. Stiff. We could fight this, Mr. Jackson. You could. Elijah agreed. But every home you built is already sold. Every buyer now has to wonder who owns their house. You want to fight? That's going to get messy. Expensive. And public. Another long pause. We'll be in touch. The line went dead. 2 days later, the official offer arrived via courier. $4.2 million for the land, plus a non-disclosure agreement, and an acknowledgement that Elijah would release all claims to the structures built. Boone nearly choked on his coffee. I've seen bribes dressed up before, but that's next level, he said, tossing the offer aside. Elijah didn't respond. He was watching his neighbor's kids through the window, jumping on a trampoline their parents had just installed. The trampoline sat where his grandfather used to park his tractor. He didn't want those kids displaced. He didn't want those families hurt. But he also wasn't going to let West Haven walk away with a wrist slap. So, Elijah drafted a counter. He rejected the offer, demanded full assessed value for every sold home and unsold lot, minus a 10% discount for bulk settlement. He agreed not to pursue eviction or seizure, but required West Haven to cover legal costs for every homeowner needing a corrected deed. And he demanded ownership of the community center, parks, and all remaining properties. $61 million. No gag order, no silence, and a public apology. Jessica didn't call. Her name wasn't on any of the new correspondence, but Elijah heard rumors. She was on leave. Some said fired. Others said she resigned. Didn't matter. The fight had moved to the boardroom now. Over the next 4 weeks, lawyers from both sides met nearly every day. Boone and Simone sat across the table from West Haven's corporate counsel, hammering out details while Elijah remained mostly quiet, watching it all unfold. They tried everything, offered less money, threatened arbitration, even suggested Elijah had intentionally allowed construction to continue. Elijah stayed calm. You built on my land. I didn't ask you to. I told you not to. You ignored me. In the end, West Haven caved. The final agreement was signed 6 weeks after the failed ribbon cutting. Elijah received $54 million in total compensation, ownership of the community clubhouse, the undeveloped lots, and full legal rights to manage the correction of homeowner deeds, without displacing a single family. The settlement was announced publicly at a press conference. Elijah didn't say much, just thanked his great-grandfather for his foresight and reminded the crowd that sometimes the past has a way of protecting the future. He walked away without fanfare. No cameras, no interviews, just peace. But Elijah wasn't finished, not until he made sure Otis's legacy meant something bigger than revenge. The money didn't change Elijah, not in the ways people expect. He still lived in the same house, the creaky old farmhouse where he'd grown up, where his mama's cooking had made the walls smell like fried okra for days, and where Otis's hammer marks were still visible in the doorframe. He didn't buy a new truck, didn't move to a bigger city, didn't put up gates around the property. But he did build something. A few months after the settlement, Elijah took a portion of the money, around $18 million, and bought another 40-acre tract of land just 10 miles east, outside the small town of Tuskegee. Land no one had claimed for decades. He named it the Otis Project. With the help of local contractors, teachers, and community leaders, Elijah started constructing what he called a different kind of neighborhood. Not for profit, but for people who never got the chance to live in places like West Haven. Houses were priced at cost. Mortgage assistance was built into the program. Applications were reviewed with compassion, not credit scores. By the end of the first year, 24 homes had been completed, and every single one was filled with families. Teachers, single parents, factory workers, veterans. No one was turned away for having less. One morning, while standing in the middle of the Otis Project's first street, Elijah watched a group of kids play tag on a front lawn. One little boy reminded him of his brother Curtis, back when they were 7 and too stubborn to wear shoes in summer. Boone showed up later that afternoon, holding a clipboard and a big grin. "You know what they're calling you in town now?" Elijah raised an eyebrow. "What?" "The accidental mayor," Boone chuckled. "Folks say you got handed millions, and instead of disappearing, you started giving away front porches." Elijah smiled. "Otis didn't raise hoarders. He raised workers." That wasn't just talk. Elijah used part of the remaining money to fund a community center in Opelika. Free tutoring programs, job placement resources, and a garden where elders taught kids how to grow tomatoes that didn't come from a grocery store. He even turned the old West Haven Community Clubhouse, which he now legally owned, into a shared resource center. He renamed it Jackson Hall. The tennis courts were opened up for free lessons to local youth. The pool offered senior swim hours 3 mornings a week. The HOA hated it at first, but the homeowners? They loved it. At first, a few residents avoided Elijah. They thought he was going to take their homes away, that he was the enemy. But over time, they realized he wasn't interested in destroying what they'd built. He just wanted credit for what his family had already built before them. Now, many of them came to him directly, asking about repairs, local service recommendations, or advice on growing vegetables in Alabama's stubborn red clay. He never turned anyone away. "I ain't trying to be a hero," he told one of the new homeowners, a single mom named Yvette. "I just believe land should never be taken without remembering who sweated for it first." Yvette nodded. "Well, my son thinks you're some kind of superhero." Elijah chuckled. "You ever see me try to change a flat tire? He'd change his mind real quick." As the second year of the Otis project got underway, Elijah made one last visit to the county archives. The same building where he'd first pulled the original deed now held something new, a framed photo of Otis Jackson, and beneath it a plaque that read, "In honor of the man who protected his land so his descendants could protect their community." Elijah stood there quietly for a moment, then reached into his pocket. He took out a small object wrapped in cloth, Otis's old railroad watch. He placed it gently on the glass counter near the display. "He always did hate being late," Elijah muttered. Outside, the sky had turned that soft golden color just before sundown. The same kind of sky Otis used to admire after a long day in the fields. Elijah smiled, not the smile of someone who'd won, but the smile of someone who'd kept a promise. Because in the end, the clause wasn't just about stopping thieves, it was about making sure no one forgot who came before them. And now? Now the land was speaking again, louder than the bulldozers ever did. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories like this, real, raw, and rooted in truth, coming soon.